One minute I'm minding my own business in my parents' basement, and the next my mom is literally shoving me into a life I never asked for. Let me back up. My name is Miles. Miles Webb. 22 years old, recent graduate of a fine liberal arts institution that has yet to do a single thing for my employment prospects, and current resident of a basement that smells like laundry detergent and broken dreams. The basement wasn't so bad, honestly. I had a mini fridge, I had my laptop, I had a string of fairy lights that made the whole place look like a Pinterest board for sad people. It was a system. Then, my mother destroyed it. "You applied for me?" I stared at the confirmation email on her phone. The subject line read, "Congratulations, you have been selected for the live-in household manager position at the Vance estate." "Don't make that face." She was already pulling a duffel bag from the top of my closet. "What face? This is my face. This is the face of a man watching his own mother sabotage him." "I'm not sabotaging you, I'm launching you." She folded one of my shirts with terrifying efficiency. "You have a degree in child development and a minor in business. You've been down here watching YouTube for 4 months, Miles." "Educational YouTube?" $68,000 a year, live-in, private room, meals included. I stopped talking. That was an obscene amount of money, the kind of number that makes your brain do a little stutter step before it processes. "What's the catch?" I asked. She paused just a beat too long. "Mom, what's the catch?" "It's for Harrison Vance." She said it like a fact and nothing else, but the way she pressed her lips together after meant she was holding back more. I'd heard the name. Everyone had heard the name. Vance Technologies, Vance Real Estate. The kind of wealth that doesn't just have addresses, it owns zip codes. The kind of man who shows up in Forbes and never smiles in the photos. "He has kids," she added. "Twins, 5 years old." "I'd like kids." "His last 3 managers quit within a week." There it was. I looked at the duffel bag she'd already half packed. I looked at my fairy lights. I looked at the empty Red Bull can on my desk. "This feels like a human trafficking situation," I said. She handed me my jacket. 40 minutes later, I was standing in front of a wrought iron gate with my 2 bags and a feeling in my chest that I can only describe as existential vertigo, the kind you get when you realize your life has just pivoted without asking your permission. The gate swung open automatically. The driveway was long enough to train for a 5K on. The house, calling it a house feels like calling the Atlantic Ocean a puddle, sat at the end of it like it had been designed specifically to make people feel small. All glass and stone and sharp angles, but old trees softening the edges, the kind that had been there long before the money. I stood on the porch with my bags and thought, there is no universe in which this ends well for me. Then I rang the doorbell. The door opened, and the first thing I registered was the scowl. Not the man, the scowl. It arrived before everything else, before the height, before the jaw, before the suit that probably cost more than my education. The scowl was its own weather system, a full front moving in from the north, capable of flash-freezing small mammals. Then I registered the rest of him, and honestly, that was somehow worse. Harrison Vance was unfairly, aggressively, irritatingly handsome. Dark hair, sharp cheekbones, eyes the color of expensive whiskey, except whiskey has warmth in it, and his had none. He was somewhere in his mid-30s, dressed like a board meeting that had just gone badly, and he was looking at me like I was a delivery that had arrived to the wrong address. Clinging to his left leg like a barnacle was a small person wearing a cape made out of a dish towel. "You're the manager?" Harrison said. "I'm Miles Webb, your new household manager, and you're 22. "Correct, as listed on my CV. He looked at my sneakers, then back at my face, then at my sneakers again like he was running the math and the math kept coming out wrong. "The agency said you had experience. 2 years of after-school tutoring, summer camp counseling, and I have a very good relationship with toddlers." I smiled. "They're basically tiny, chaotic adults. I'm great with chaotic adults." He did not smile back. The small barnacle on his leg had been watching me with giant, unblinking eyes, round face, dark curls, wearing the dish towel cape and one sock. Just the one. "What's your name?" I asked, crouching down. The kid stared at me for a full 4 seconds. "Leo," he finally announced. "I have a sword." He produced a wooden spoon from somewhere behind him. "Solid choice. I respect the craftsmanship." That got a giggle. One small giggle, quickly suppressed behind the dish towel. Harrison put a hand on Leo's shoulder, which I interpreted as, "Step back, child, while I dismantle this person with my eyes." This isn't a good time. We've had 3 managers in 2 months. The last one called it emotionally untenable. I'm not emotionally untenable in general, so that's a non-issue. A long pause. He stepped aside. I took that as an invitation and walked in, because I was not going back to the basement. The interior was all high ceilings and light, the kind of house that a designer had clearly worked very hard to make look effortless. Clean lines, muted colors, expensive silence. Everything was in its correct place, and there was a sterility to it, like a showroom that nobody actually lived in. From somewhere upstairs came a shriek. A joyful shriek, I should clarify, not the horror movie kind, the "I'm a small child with infinite energy and no concept of consequences" kind. Then a second small person came barreling down the stairs at a speed that should not be physically possible for someone with legs that short. Dark curls, same round face as Leo, purple leggings, one sock, matching the solo sock energy of her brother, I noted. She skidded to a halt in front of me, looked me up and down, and said, "You're not Mrs. Calloway." "Correct, I'm Miles." Mrs. Calloway smelled like lavender. I smell like a car ride and mild panic. The girl, Maya, I would learn, considered this. "Okay," she said, and then immediately ran back upstairs. Leo was still looking at me with his wooden spoon. Harrison was looking at me like I was a puzzle he hadn't decided whether to bother solving. "The tour," he said. Not, "Shall I give you a tour," or "Would you like to see the house?" Just, "the tour," like a command delivered to someone who was already on thin ice. I followed him. The house had 7 bedrooms, a chef's kitchen, a home office that looked like it cost more per square foot than my parents' entire home, a mudroom, a laundry room, a formal dining room no one apparently used, and a playroom so full of toys it looked like it had survived a small explosion. He didn't narrate any of this, he just walked, and I followed, and the silence between us was doing things that silences shouldn't be able to do. By the end of it, he turned to face me in the hallway and said, "Breakfast is at 7. The children have a strict routine. I leave at 8 and return by 7 in the evening. You do not touch my office." He paused. "There is a manual." "A manual?" "Yes." I wanted to ask if this was a household or a military installation, but I figured that line of questioning could wait until day 2. "I'll review the manual," I said. He handed me a key card for my room and walked away without another word. I stood in the hallway, bags at my feet, and thought, $68,000. $68,000. $68,000. From upstairs, something crashed. The manual was 37 pages. 37. I sat on my bed, a very nice bed, I'll give him that, the kind of mattress that makes you feel personally apologized to by the universe, and I read it from cover to cover. Page 1, the household schedule. Wake-up times, meal times, bath times, quiet times, all in 15-minute increments. Page 4, kitchen protocol. The organic produce is to be stored separately from the conventional produce. There are 3 different cutting boards with designated purposes. The 3rd drawer on the left is not to be reorganized under any circumstances. Page 9. The Children's Educational Framework. Leo and Maya were to spend at least 2 hours per day on structured learning activities. There was a recommended curriculum. It had footnotes. Page 14. Social Media and Privacy Policy. Under no circumstances were photographs of the children to be taken or shared. Under no circumstances was the address to be disclosed. Under no circumstances were the children to be used for any form of content creation. Fine. Reasonable. Understood. Page 21. Emotional regulation standards. The children are to be redirected from emotional outbursts using the attached method. The attached method was a 6-step protocol that looked like something NASA used for de-escalating astronaut disputes. Page 32. Personal conduct expectations. Professional demeanor at all times. No personal phone calls in common areas. No guests without prior written approval. No alteration of household routines without a 48-hour notice period. I put the manual down. I picked it back up because I thought I'd imagined page 33. I had not imagined page 33. Page 33 said, "The use of the phrase, 'let's just wing it,' is strongly discouraged in all household contexts." Someone had written this man a 37-page manual and included a prohibited phrase list. I thought about my fairy lights in the basement. I thought about my mini fridge. I thought about $68,000. I went to make breakfast. The twins found me in the kitchen at 6:52, which was 8 minutes before the scheduled wake-up time. They were already in full chaos mode, Leo with his wooden spoon again, Maya wearing a tiara at a very aggressive angle. "We want pancakes," Maya announced. "Schedule says oatmeal," I said. They looked at each other, the kind of look that 7-year-olds give each other when they're about to make a decision as a unit. I know, they were 5, but they had the energy and strategic intelligence of a very small military faction. "Oatmeal is fine," Leo said, very pleasantly, suspiciously pleasantly. I should have clocked the pleasantness. I got the oats going. I turned to get the bowls. My left shoe was gone. Not both shoes, just the left one. I'd come in wearing both. I was now standing in one shoe, and I had absolutely no idea when this had happened. I looked at Leo. He was stirring the oatmeal with extreme innocence. Maya was now also stirring it, which meant neither of them was stirring it correctly, and also both of them had had access to the oatmeal spoon. "Where is my shoe?" I asked. "What shoe?" "My left shoe, the one that was on my foot approximately 3 minutes ago." "Shoes don't just vanish," Leo said with the gravity of a very small philosopher. I looked under the table. I looked behind the kitchen island. I looked in the playroom doorway, which was open because I had not closed it. Harrison chose this exact moment to walk in. He was already in his suit. He looked at me. One shoe, a mismatched sock situation, a spoon I'd been holding for unclear reasons, and his expression didn't change. It never changed. But something behind his eyes said, I was right. He won't last. "The oatmeal is almost ready," I said with absolute dignity. He poured his coffee and said nothing. My shoe, for the record, turned up inside a plant pot in the mudroom. It had been there long enough for them to have replaced the soil around it. These were 5-year-olds. The great glitter incident. It was Maya's idea. It was always Maya's idea. I found out about it the same way I found out about most things in this house. Too late, when the damage was already aesthetic. I'd been in the laundry room for 20 minutes. 20 minutes! I came back to find the entire length of the hallway floor covered in gold and silver glitter, applied in what Maya was calling a star pattern and what I was calling a biohazard. "What?" I said. "Stars," Maya said. She gestured at the floor with the pride of someone unveiling a commissioned work. "Maya, the hallway was boring. The hallway was clean." Harrison appeared at the top of the stairs, looked down at the glitter situation, and then looked at me with the expression of someone who had been invited to participate, but made the strategic decision to stay uninvolved. Smart kid. "Where did you even get glitter?" "The craft box." "We have a craft box?" "Behind the blue bin in the playroom." She tilted her head. "You didn't know about the craft box?" I had not known about the craft box. The craft box was apparently a weapons cache disguised as an arts and crafts supply. I found it afterward. 3 kinds of glitter, 2 kinds of paint, sticker sheets, a glue gun in a house with 5-year-olds, which was a conversation I was going to have with the universe later, and enough pipe cleaners to construct a small vehicle. I got out the vacuum. Glitter, for anyone who has not had the pleasure, does not vacuum. Glitter relocates. You vacuum it off the hallway floor and it migrates to the vacuum itself and then back onto the floor and also somehow onto you. I vacuumed the hallway for 40 minutes. By the end, I had cleared approximately 60% of it. The remaining 40% had distributed itself across the hallway, the kitchen threshold, my left sleeve, and, inexplicably, the inside of my right ear. Harrison came home at 5:30. He stopped in the hallway. He looked at the floor. He looked at me, still holding the vacuum. He looked at Maya sitting on the stairs with her tiara on, completely unbothered. "Stars," Maya explained helpfully. Harrison looked at me again. "She has a vision," I said. He looked down at the floor once more, then walked through the hallway to his office. About halfway there, he paused, looked at his own sleeve, and found glitter on it from absolutely nowhere. He looked at me over his shoulder. "Craft box," I said. "I'll handle it." He closed the office door. I was still finding glitter on myself 3 days later. I found some in my water bottle on day 4. I chose not to investigate how. Here's the thing about kids. The second you try to control them, you've already lost. I know this. I've always known this. You don't beat a 5-year-old at their own game by being the authority. You beat them by joining the game and then subtly steering the whole thing off a cliff. By day 3, I had a plan. It was raining outside. The twins had been inside since morning, and you could feel the energy in the house building like static electricity. Leo had already knocked a vase off the side table. It was fine, I caught it. And Maya had somehow acquired an entire bag of dried pasta and was using it as percussion on the kitchen floor. Harrison was in his office. I stood in the living room, surveyed the couch cushions and the mountain of throw blankets that the twins had already been pulling apart with total commitment, and I made a decision. "Okay," I said. "Stop." They stopped, mostly because they were curious about what I was going to say. "Your racetrack thing," I said, "the one you were doing in the kitchen yesterday?" That was mid, honestly. Maya squinted. "What's mid?" "Mediocre, average, no notes except bigger. You had the right concept, but the wrong venue." Leo cocked his head. "What venue do we need?" "The whole living room." I picked up a couch cushion. "And we're not making a racetrack. We're making a fortress." 4 seconds of silence. Then, absolute pandemonium, but the good kind. I have built some pillow forts in my time. The summer camp years were formative, but what we constructed that afternoon was a work. It had corridors, it had a main chamber, it had a flag, Maya's tiara repurposed. Leo insisted on a dungeon section, which was really just under the coffee table, but we draped it in dark blankets and it was legitimately atmospheric. The rules were simple. No furniture actually moved, only cushions and blankets and the fold-up camping chairs from the mudroom that I was approximately 70% sure Harrison didn't know existed. Everything had to be deconstructible within 10 minutes. We operated within a clear exit strategy. For 3 hours, we were completely, gloriously inside it. Leo taught me a game that involved rolling a ball through the corridor while the other person defended the main chamber. Maya developed an elaborate lore system where the fortress belonged to a dragon who had a complicated relationship with her neighbors. I was cast as the emissary from the outside world, which felt thematically accurate. We ate lunch inside the fort, PB&J, which was on the schedule and therefore required no negotiation. By 4 o'clock, both of them had completely burned through their reserves. Leo was lying in the main chamber staring at the blanket ceiling with a meditative stillness of someone who had used every drop of available energy. Maya had fallen asleep against my shoulder with her tiara askew, still holding the plastic ball from the corridor game. I stretched out, pulled a blanket over all 3 of us, and thought, "This is fine. I'll rest for 5 minutes." I was asleep in 3. Harrison Vance had a method for coming home. Not consciously, probably, but I would learn it over the following weeks. The key in the door, the pause in the entryway, the 3-second assessment of ambient sound and order before he moved deeper into the house. It was the kind of ritual a person develops when they've learned to brace for things. That evening, what he heard was silence. Not the bad kind, not the something has gone wrong kind, but the thick, settled quiet of a house where nothing needs attention. The kind of silence that takes energy to create. I didn't see him come in. I was asleep. But I would find out later much later, what he'd seen when he walked into the living room. The fortress was still standing. Blankets and cushions, the camping chairs, Leo's flag still flying, and in the middle of it, visible through the main entrance we'd built from 2 sofa cushions at an angle, were 3 shapes under a pile of blankets. Leo on my left, starfished like a small snow angel. Maya on my right, tiara pressed into my shoulder. Me in the middle, one arm around each of them, completely out cold. He didn't wake us. He stood there for a while, I think. Long enough that when I did wake up, startled, disoriented, neck at a truly criminal angle, and peeled myself out from between them, I found the kitchen light on and a plate of food covered in plastic wrap on the counter, with a post-it note that said, "Leftovers in the fridge." No signature. I put the note in my pocket and reheated the food. Over the next week, things shifted at the edges. Harrison still scowled. The manual was still 37 pages and still included a prohibited phrase list. Breakfast was still at 7. But he started coming home at 6 instead of 7. Sometimes 5:50. I noticed, but I didn't say anything. It started with insomnia. Not mine, his. I'd figured it out by week 3. The light under his office door at 11, midnight, 1 in the morning. I'd be up because Maya had had a nightmare and needed water and, sometimes, also a full dramatic reenactment of the nightmare in order to process it, and I'd come downstairs to find the rest of the house dark except for that sliver of light. The 3rd time I made myself tea at midnight and heard the office door open, I made 2 cups without thinking about it. He appeared in the kitchen doorway in a gray t-shirt and sweatpants. Not the suit, not the armor. It was profoundly unfair how good he looked out of the suit, is all I'll say about that. He looked at the 2nd cup. He looked at me. "Couldn't sleep," I said, because somebody had to say something. He sat down at the kitchen island without a word, which I chose to interpret as, "Thank you for the tea." I pushed it across to him. He wrapped both hands around it like it was something that needed holding. We sat in the quiet for a while. It was a different kind of quiet from the daytime silence in this house, less hollow somehow. "Leo asked me about his mother today," he said. I didn't move, didn't push, just let it sit. His mother was actually... He stopped, recalibrated. Her name was Daniel. The children's biological mother was a surrogate. Daniel was my partner. I let that land without making a face or a sound or a thing. He died 5 years ago. Cardiac event. He never... Harrison's jaw tightened. He knew about the twins, but he never met them. They were born 3 weeks after. The kitchen was very still. "I'm sorry," I said, not as filler, just because it was true. He nodded once, the gesture of someone who has been told, "I'm sorry," enough times that they've learned to file it efficiently. "He would have been very bad at the manual," he said. I blinked. And Harrison Vance, scowling, cold, 37-page Harrison Vance, made a sound. Barely. A short exhale through his nose that in another universe might have been a laugh. My heart did something inadvisable. "Stop it," I told my heart. My heart was not listening. After that night, it became a thing. Not every night, maybe 3 times a week. The 2nd cup of tea appeared, he appeared, we sat at the kitchen island, and somewhere between the 1st cup and the 2nd, the conversation would go somewhere real. He told me about the company, about the board meetings that felt like endurance tests, about the expansion into Southeast Asia that was taking up 18 hours of his day. He told me about Daniel, carefully, sparingly, the way you pick up glass, and I understood then that the coldness wasn't cruelty. It was just a man who'd built a very good wall and was only recently starting to forget why he needed it. I told him about the basement. He almost smiled at the fairy lights part. Almost, but his eyes did something. I told myself I was imagining it. I started going to bed before 11. I started finding reasons to be in the other room when he came home. I was getting too comfortable in this kitchen at midnight, too fluent in the language of his silences, too aware of the exact angle at which he tilted his head when he was thinking about something. This was employment. He was my employer. I was a broke 22-year-old in someone else's house, and the someone else was a grieving widower with 2 kids and more trauma than I was qualified to navigate. I repeated this to myself, frequently, like a mantra. It didn't help. I lasted 11 days of strategic avoidance. I was good at it, objectively. I had the kid's schedule optimized to keep me occupied through every hour he was home. I ate with Leo and Maya at 5:30 and cleaned up before he returned. I made sure there was food covered on the counter and went to my room by the time I heard his key in the door. If he noticed, he didn't say anything. Until he did. It was a Thursday. The kids had been fed and bathed and were in bed by 8, an absolute miracle, a testament to my growing expertise. The house was quiet. I was in the hallway between the kitchen and the stairs, on my way to my room with a glass of water and my phone, and I was so close, 6 feet from the staircase. The office door opened. Harrison stepped out. We both stopped. He was in the gray t-shirt again. In the dim light of the hallway, only the lamp at the end was on. He looked different from the daytime version of himself. Less constructed. More like a person. "Miles," he said. "Mr. Vance, I gestured vaguely at the stairs. He didn't move. I should have gone around him. There was space. The hallway was wide, and if I just sidestepped with purpose and said goodnight in a very final tone, I could have. He stepped into my path. Not aggressively, not grabbing me, not blocking me with his body in a dramatic way, just stepped to the side that I was about to go to, so that I was now very close to the wall, and he was very close to me, and there was nowhere to go without making it weird. It was already weird. I was making it weird by standing very still and gripping my water glass. "You've been avoiding me," he said. "I haven't been. I've been busy with the kids. The schedule is actually—" "Miles." My name in his voice had started to do something I didn't have clinical language for. Not the employer's summoning employee version. The other version. The midnight kitchen version. "The kids are asleep by 7, he said. "You've been in your room by 8 every night this week. I'm a homebody. You're not." He was right. I was the opposite of a homebody. I was constitutionally incapable of being alone in a room without finding someone to talk to. He knew this because we had sat at his kitchen island and I had talked for 3 hours about things I hadn't told anyone. I looked at the wall beside me. This isn't professional. "I know." He said it without the hesitation I'd been expecting. No argument, no counterframing. Just, "I know." "You're my employer." "I know that too." "So you understand why I can't—" I looked back at him, and that was a mistake, because he was looking at me with something that had no business in a professional context, and I was suddenly very aware of every inch of distance, or lack thereof, between us. "Stop running from me," he said. Low, direct. Not a demand exactly, but not a question. My brain offered me several responses in quick succession. The witty one, the deflecting one, the professional boundary one. I said none of them. I said, "Harrison." And calling him by his first name, out loud, for the first time, was its own kind of crossing. He exhaled. Slow. "You're the first person in 5 years who sits in that kitchen like the silence is enough," he said. "The first person who makes the kids laugh without trying to manage them. The first person—" He stopped. The jaw thing. The recalibrating. I have not wanted things in a very long time. I had decided wanting was not available to me anymore. He reached out and tucked something behind my ear. A strand of hair, probably. A very small, very deliberate gesture. "You dismantled that argument," he said, "without even knowing you were making it." I had been a functioning human being with adequate verbal skills for 22 years. I had nothing. "I don't know how to do this," I said. "I'm 22. I'm literally on your payroll. I have no idea what I'm doing most of the time, Harrison. I laughed. a little helplessly. "I'm the guy who lost his shoe to a 5-year-old. I am not equipped for—" I gestured at him. "This!" Something changed in his face. The thing that was almost a smile arrived again, and this time it made it the full distance. It was brief. It was tired and real and small, but it was there. And it wrecked me completely. "You're the only person in this house who doesn't treat me like I'm made of expensive furniture." I looked at him for a long moment. "To be fair," I said, "you are a little bit like expensive furniture." He laughed. Actually laughed. Short, quiet, like he was surprised it happened, but a real laugh, no question. And in the half-lit hallway of a house that had been mostly silent for 5 years, it was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. I was completely and absolutely done for. The first date. He asked me on a Tuesday, not romantically. There was no preamble. He appeared in the kitchen doorway while I was doing the dinner dishes and said, "Are you free Saturday evening?" I turned off the tap. "The kids." "My sister is coming to stay. She's been asking to spend time with them." A pause. "I thought we could have dinner." I looked at him. "Just us," he added, as if I hadn't understood. "I understood the first time. Yes, Saturday." He nodded and left the kitchen, and I turned the tap back on and stood there doing absolutely nothing with the dishes for about a minute and a half. Saturday arrived. The twins knew something was happening. They always knew. And Maya had opinions about what I should wear that she delivered with the authority of a very small fashion consultant. Leo was less interested in my outfit and more interested in conducting a formal interrogation about where we were going and whether there would be dessert. "Where are you going?" Leo asked. "Dinner." "Why?" "Because adults eat dinner." "We eat dinner." "Adults eat dinner at restaurants," I said, "with napkins." Leo considered this. "Can I come?" "No." "Why?" "Because it's a—" I stopped. I looked at Leo's round, wide, completely guileless face. "Because it's a grown-up dinner." "Oh," he said. He seemed to accept this. Then, "Do you like my dad?" "We covered this." "I know, but do you really like him?" "Leo." "Because he smiles more now," Leo said, in the matter-of-fact tone of a person stating an observable fact. "He didn't used to smile. Now he does." He looked up at me. "That's because of you." I crouched down to his level. He looked at me steadily with Harrison's eyes in a 5-year-old's face. "Your dad is very important to me," I said. "Is that okay?" Leo thought about this with genuine seriousness. "Yes," he decided, "but if you make him sad, I will use the sword." "Completely fair." He offered his hand. We shook on it. Harrison appeared at the top of the stairs in a dark jacket, and I had to actively instruct my face to behave itself. He came down, looked at me, looked at the kids, and said goodbye to his sister, who appeared from the sitting room to collect them. Maya hugged my legs. "You look nice," she told me. "You're biased." "I picked the shirt," she said, and walked away. The restaurant was quiet and low-lit, and the kind of place where the menu doesn't have prices on it, which I had decided to simply not think about. We sat across from each other, and it was different from the kitchen island. No island between us, no tasks to do with our hands, just a table and 2 menus, and the fact of having chosen to be there. "You're nervous," Harrison said, 5 minutes in. "I'm not nervous. You've read that menu 3 times. I'm very thorough." He reached across the table and moved the menu out of my hands. Not aggressively, just set it aside, gently, and looked at me. "It's just dinner," he said. "It's not just dinner." "No," he agreed, "it's not." We talked for 3 hours, not about the kids, not about the house, not about work, about everything else, the things that don't come up at midnight over tea because there's always a practical anchor. He told me about growing up, about the early years of the company, about the trip to Lisbon he and Daniel had taken that he still thinks about when he sees tiled buildings anywhere. I told him about university, about the failed internship, about Biscuit the dog in the backyard in New Jersey and my mother, and her spectacular capacity for being right about things. He asked questions, actual interested questions, the kind that meant he was tracking the whole conversation and had been from the start. Midway through the main course, he reached across and fixed my collar. Completely casual, one finger adjusting the fold, then back to his fork. I lost my entire train of thought. "You were saying?" he prompted. I have no idea what I was saying. He looked at me with that expression, the almost smile, the warm eyes, and said nothing. That was deliberate, I said. I don't know what you mean. Harrison. Eat your dinner, Miles. I ate my dinner. We split dessert without discussing it. He just ordered one and 2 spoons arrived. I noted this and stored it in a folder in my brain labeled, Things That Will End Me. Walking back to the car, his hand found the small of my back for about 4 seconds to steer me around a puddle. 4 seconds. I thought about those 4 seconds the entire drive home. He kissed me in the hallway and neither of us said anything about it afterwards. I went to bed. He went back to his office. In the morning, breakfast was at 7. Leo demanded triangle-cut toast with profound conviction, and Maya staged a protest about her shoes until I located the correct purple ones, under the radiator, 4th time this month. Harrison came down at 7:45, poured his coffee, and looked at me across the kitchen. I looked back. Leo, who missed nothing, looked between us with the evaluative squint of a 5-year-old who had sensed a shift in the household power structure. "Miles," Leo said. "Yeah, bud. Do you like my dad?" Harrison made a sound into his coffee cup. "Your dad is okay," I said. "He never smiles," Naya said from inside her cereal. "He smiles," I said. "When?" I looked at Harrison. He was looking at his coffee with what I had come to understand was his version of a grin, the slight softening around the eyes, the almost there thing at the corner of his mouth that only showed up when it surprised him. "Sometimes," I said. The days after that were different in a way that was hard to quantify. Nothing dramatic happened. Nothing changed on paper. I was still the household manager. He was still my employer. There were still 37 pages of rules, 29 of which I had by now learned to work around, but the architecture of the house shifted. He started coming home at 5, sometimes 4:30, which sent Leo into a frenzy of excitement that was honestly a little hard to watch because it was so purely happy. Harrison would come through the door, and Leo would charge at him full speed with the wooden spoon, and Maya would trail behind with whatever elaborate construction she'd built that afternoon that required immediate inspection. And Harrison would crouch down and look at it, actually look at it, and ask questions. And Leo would explain at length, and Maya would add structural notes. And this man who had been carved from frost was sitting on the living room floor examining a tower made of cardboard tubes and approximately 40 hair clips with the focus of an architect. I stood in the doorway and watched this and thought, there he is, the person underneath the manual. The one who'd been sitting in his office until midnight for 5 years, not because he was workaholic, but because the silence in the rest of the house was a different kind of hard. He caught me watching once. I didn't look away. Neither did he. Leo, completely unaware that he was standing in the middle of an extremely charged moment, announced that the tower needed a flag and disappeared to find materials. We had the conversation. The real one, not the hallway one, on a Sunday evening when the kids were in the bath. I was at the kitchen island, he was across from me with his coffee, and we talked for a long time about what this was and what it wasn't, and what it could be. I told him I wasn't going anywhere. He looked at me like that was information that required processing. I walked into this house thinking I'd last a week. Just so we're clear, I know exactly what I came for. $68,000 a year and a room that isn't a basement. I paused. That's not what I'm staying for. What are you staying for? Leo chose this moment to appear in the kitchen doorway in a towel, soaking wet, announcing that Maya had turned the bath into a water experiment and there was significant flooding. I pointed at Harrison. We'll finish this later. He followed me upstairs and we handled the water experiment, which involved 2 very wet small children, 3 towels, and Maya explaining calmly that the drain clearly had a design flaw and she was not at fault. Later, well after the kids were in bed, after we'd cleaned up the bathroom, after Harrison had sat next to me on the couch for the first time with no kitchen island between us, he answered his own question. I know what I'm staying for, he said. He wasn't looking at me when he said it. He was looking at the living room, at the fort he'd built, at the fort building kits Leo had lined up against the wall, because apparently that was a permanent installation now, at the child's drawing taped to the wall beside the TV. Me, Harrison, Leo, and Maya, stick figures labeled in Maya's careful handwriting. Our family. He'd put that drawing up himself, 2 weeks ago. I'd come downstairs and found him pressing the corners of the tape flat with his thumb, very carefully, making sure it would hold. I didn't say anything then. I didn't say anything now. I leaned against his shoulder and he didn't move away. And we sat in the quiet that had stopped being hollow sometime around week 2, when a terrible pillow fortress had apparently recalibrated the entire house. There's a version of this story where I'm the one who saved him, where the lonely, grieving man gets the warmth back in his house, and the hero is the broke 22-year-old with the charismatic personality and the excellent fort-building skills. That version is technically true, but incomplete. Here's the fuller version. My mom shoved me out the door on a Tuesday, and by Wednesday, I was standing in front of a gate thinking my life had been hijacked. I had a manual, I had a scowl aimed at me with the force of a weather event, I had twins who stole my shoe on day 1 and had since then periodically hidden various items of mine in locations that suggested genuine creativity. I had no idea what I was doing. I went on instinct and bad sleep, and the hard-won lesson that the only way to win with chaos is to get in the middle of it. But Harrison Vance had also been waiting. Not consciously, not with intention, but the house had been waiting for someone who would sit in the silence without needing to fill it with the right thing. Someone who would find the wooden spoon sword impressive rather than alarming. Someone who would make the second cup of tea before being asked. He'd needed someone who would stay. And I who had been launched against my will from a perfectly adequate basement, had apparently needed the thing that would make staying matter. Maya still steals things. Leo has graduated from the wooden spoon to a full foam rubber sword I bought at a craft fair, which Harrison uses to block during their after-dinner battles with an expression of extreme seriousness that makes me have to leave the room to laugh. The manual is technically still 37 pages. I have read it so many times I could recite it backwards. Page 33, the prohibited phrase list, I have now committed to memory as a running gag. I say, let's just wing it approximately once a week, deliberately, just to watch what Harrison does with his coffee cup. What he does now is sigh, a very long-suffering, very fond sigh. And then, usually about 4 seconds later, he helps me wing it. The drawings on the wall have multiplied. We buy the tape in bulk. My mother came on a Sunday. I hadn't planned it as a formal introduction. She'd been asking to visit for weeks. Just to see the place, Miles, just to meet the children. I'm not going to make it weird. And I'd held her off for as long as I could before accepting that holding off my mother was like holding back weather. She arrived at 11 with a Tupperware of food that she handed to me at the door without explanation. "Mom, I cook here. There's a whole kitchen." Mm-hmm. She was already looking past me into the house. Leo appeared from the hallway at a dead sprint, skidded to a stop in front of her, and looked up. "Are you Miles's mom?" "I am," she said. "You look like Miles." "He looks like me," she corrected, and Leo considered this distinction seriously. "Do you want to see my sword?" "I would love to see your sword," she said. And that was it. Leo took her hand and dragged her toward the living room, and she went, looking around the house as she walked, the drawings on the wall, the boots by the door, the organized chaos of a home where people actually lived. And I watched her eyes take inventory of all of it. Maya descended the stairs with her tiara on and said, "Are you famous?" "Not yet," my mother said. Maya seemed satisfied. "I'm Maya." "I know. Miles talks about you constantly." Maya looked at me. "You talk about us?" "I give status updates. It's different," I said. Harrison appeared from the kitchen, suit-free Sunday. Dark shirt, sleeves rolled up, and he came forward and put his hand out and said, "Mrs. Webb, thank you for coming." My mother shook his hand. She looked at him for a moment. The full assessment. The thing she did where she looked at a person and decided everything about them in approximately 8 seconds. I had been on the receiving end of this look my entire life, and it was not comfortable. "You have a good house," she said. "Thank you," Harrison said. "I wasn't talking about the building." A pause. Harrison looked at her, then at me, then back at her with the expression of a man recalibrating. "Come in," he said. "Can I get you coffee?" "Please," she said, and followed him to the kitchen like they'd known each other for years. I stood in the hallway for a moment. Leo tugged my sleeve. "Your mom is cool," he said. "She really isn't," I said. "She's a menace." "Like Maya," he said approvingly. From the kitchen came the sound of my mother already talking. She had moved past coffee small talk and into something substantive, her voice warm and direct, and Harrison's voice responding. And this was either going very well or very badly, and I couldn't tell yet. I went in. It was going well. They were at the kitchen island, my kitchen island, and she was telling him about the job listing, and he was listening with the focused attention he gave everything. "You actually wrote that listing?" Harrison said. "I tailored it. The agency had a template. I adjusted the language. Child development background, high-energy household, responds well under pressure." She picked up her coffee. I knew who I was writing it for. "Mom? I'm just saying what happened." Harrison looked at me with something warm in his expression. "You didn't tell me that." "I only found out recently," I said, "and I'm still processing the betrayal." "It wasn't betrayal," she said calmly. "It was placement. I placed you correctly." She looked around the kitchen, the drawings, the permission forms on the fridge, Captain Sir Biscuit II asleep in the corner. And I was right. I opened my mouth. "Don't," she said. "I wasn't. You were going to argue. I was going to make a nuanced point." Miles, she put her hand on mine on the island, looked at me with the expression I'd grown up with, the one that meant, "I see you, and I am not the least bit sorry. I told you, that job had your name on it." I looked at Harrison. He was looking at me with that expression again, the warm one, the real one, the one that had taken me 6 chapters of my own life to figure out how to receive without flinching. "She's not wrong," he said. I looked at the ceiling. I live with people who are never right. "You're welcome," my mother said. Leo, from the doorway, watching all of this. "Can we have pancakes?" "It's 11 in the morning," I said. "Pancakes are a morning food," he said, with complete logical confidence. My mother looked at me. She has a point. I made pancakes. The house is loud now, not in the chaotic way of those first weeks, but in the way of a place that's got people in it who want to be there. Boots at the door and arguing about what to watch, and someone always at the kitchen island, and the sound of Leo's foam sword making contact with a doorframe at an inadvisable hour. I sleep well. Harrison sleeps. That alone, I think, is the whole story. 1 minute I was in my parents' basement. Now I'm here. My mother, for the record, has never once said, "I told you so." She's implied it continuously every time I call. The end.